Alright, real quick before we get into this, I just want to address a common question, and it's also kind of the reason I'm making this video. Why is there so much blur in your Manifest recaps? Well, all of my original Manifest recaps only use long form clips directly pulled from the show. I was still new to this kind of content and didn't really know what copyright was. And all of those videos are so copyrighted, and every now and then over the past, 8 months to a year, a certain clip from that video would be blocked, making the whole video unavailable. So I just had to blur those parts out in order for those recaps to even still be available. And I spent a lot of time, a lot of months making those, but if you want to know why so many sections are blurred in those videos, it's either those or nothing. I don't know what to do at this point. I'm sorry. But I thought, especially as we just got the news of Manifest Season 4 Part 2 coming very soon in June 2nd, why don't I recap and explain the series once more with no blur and not in 6 videos that takes about 3 hours. This will obviously be a lot quicker because in those recaps, as you know, we went over every single thing in each of those seasons, no stone unturned. So today I'm going to go from Season 1 all the way to Part 1 of Season 4, condensing the full in-depth recaps into only the most important elements of the show. Before we get into it, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on that notification button for future videos, and this should be pretty clear already, but major spoiler warning. So let's see how many minutes it takes me to recap and explain the entire series of Manifest so far. On April 7th of 2013, Montego Airlines Flight 828 was flying from Jamaica to New York when the plane experienced some turbulence. After regaining control and as everything seemed normal, the pilot called ground control to tell them they were landing, but 828 was directed to land at a different airport nearby, and were met by an army of police officers and some government officials. As everyone is scrambling for answers, they are told that it is November 4th of 2018, meaning they were not gone for a couple hours, they were gone for 5.5 years, returning as the same age they left. Which is simply just a great way to set up a show. I still love the intro. While trying to integrate back into society, the passengers start experiencing visions into the future along with voices in their head that they refer to as the callings. At first, these callings always ultimately lead to them helping or saving someone, but episode by episode they become more foreboding. I can never say that word, foreboding. Ben Stone, one of our main characters, my personal favorite character, starts to build an obsession over finding out what happened to them and has his own beautiful mind map created as he collects more and more information. His family is the main one we follow. Mick, his police officer's sister, and his son Cal, who is suffering from cancer, were also on Flight 828, and then his wife Grace and his daughter Olive, Cal's twin sister, who is now 5 years older, they took a different flight. But Cal is more connected to this experience than anyone as he saw the glowing light before the storm hit the plane, muttering, "It's all connected," a phrase we hear a lot in this show. And not only does he draw out his callings, but he can also see other passengers' callings too, and every picture he draws becomes another clue in the show. Our other most important character we focus on is Dr. Sanvi Ball, a passenger on 828 who turns out to be the lead doctor in a cancer research study that Cal gets involved in. Another "it's all connected" moment. While testing Cal's DNA and some passenger DNA, she finds a protein marker in the blood that would only be present in stroke victims or if someone came back to life after dying, introducing all the resurrection theories. In comes our main villain for the first season, the US government. All law enforcement has a tight leash on 828 from the second they land, but it gets taken to a whole new level when Ben and the crew discover there's 13 missing passengers that seemingly never came back. After Cal becomes connected with one of them, they find that all 13 were kidnapped by the government and have been being tested and experimented on ever since. When Ben brings this to the head of NSA, Robert Vance, he quickly realizes that someone way more powerful is behind this. So they decide to team up, and Vance is the best ally you can have. Coincidentally, a word that's used a lot in this show, one of the passengers, Fiona Clark, is a scientist that studies collective consciousness, one of the elements at play right now. And she was hired by whoever is running the experiments on the missing passengers, but she never met who it was or really knew what was going on. So Ben and Sanvi tell her what's really happening, and she decides to help. This leads to a shootout full of explosions at the lab where they save the passengers, but they lose Vance in the process, and I was really starting to like this guy. As they continue to dig, they find out that the person behind all of this is a major general in the army, going simply by the Major. As she continues to spy in on the passengers, she becomes more aware of Cal's special connection to the callings, making him their prime target. And if the government being on their ass wasn't enough already, a hate group that thinks 828 is on some devilish voodoo shit starts to terrorize them as well. But the passengers aren't the only ones going through this experience. A late season 1 calling leads Mick and Cal to finding Zeke, a man lost in the forest in the middle of the winter who was on the brink of freezing to death. He had his own calling that led him to Mick, and upon arrival realized he was a year in the future from when he first went out in the woods. He thought he was gone for 2 weeks, but in reality he died and came back to life a year later, and no time had passed for him, giving the passengers a whole new batch of things to uncover. And next in line is Griffin. Never really liked this guy. After committing armed robbery and driving away, he crash lands in the water, sinking to the bottom, and was presumably dead. But 3 days later, when they can finally pull the car out, he awakens and starts having callings. He was dead underwater for exactly 82 hours and 8 minutes, and exactly 82 hours and 8 minutes after he comes back, he suddenly dies. Meaning for however long you were quote-unquote gone is how long you have left to live, and the way you died is how you die again. For Griffin, he puked up more water than he can fit in his body because he drowned. Ben refers to this as the death date, and it does have a ring to it. Olive has been doing research on anything mythological tied with the calling. She kind of feels left out, so she's always trying to find something, but usually it does really help. And one of the callings was a peacock, which represents resurrection and is also connected to the Greek goddess Juno, which is where we get June. There's a Gemini constellation that Mick and Zeke see when they go back to that cave he died in, and that obviously represents 2, June 2nd. And finally, one of Cal's callings was of a wooden dragon, which in the Chinese calendar represents 2024. So the passenger's death date, June 2nd, 2024, is 5.5 years after they came back, and it's been in front of them the whole time. And I don't know if I've ever said this, I probably did, because all I ever talk about is this show, but my birthday is literally the death date, June 2nd. I don't know, it's kind of weird now that I think about it. Alright, I'm sure you're wondering why we haven't talked about the pilot of 828 yet. So he and the co-pilot are the only 2 people besides Cal who really saw what happened the night of the storm. From his perspective, they flew straight through a lightning storm that should have killed them. He even tries to recreate it through a simulation, but all the documents from that night are of course hidden. Because he is constantly blamed for what happened, he goes off the rails trying to prove his innocence. He tracks down a similar lightning storm late season 1, kidnaps Fiona because he thinks she knows something, and flies right through the lightning, and this time they disappear again into thin air. Lastly, the Major infiltrates herself into Sanvi's life by posing as her therapist so she can start to get more information from her research. Because as you'll see in season 2, Sanvi is starting to make some major breakthroughs. Season 2 starts out amazingly with Vance coming back. He actually faked his own death in the explosion and is now all in on helping the passengers. What a guy. But this season has a lot of filler in the first half, so I'm just going to go over the highlights. Grace is pregnant with Ben's baby, and she is now having callings to the unborn child, bringing up so many questions of how the baby's callings and the death date they would maybe have would work. The 828 hate group called the Xers is now becoming larger and more organized, along with the 828 church that Adrian created, and I'll tell you right now, it's more of a cult than a church. And more importantly, Sanvi finds a way to eliminate the protein marker in a petri dish, then through a rat, showing that it's possible to get rid of what's causing the callings and the death date. But the Major is still on her trail and ends up stealing all of her research. And lastly, we have a new character, TJ, who's like Ben's apprentice at first, but he's digging for information just like Olive, and they make a great team. Alright, now for some big developments. As we get more references to peacocks, Grace recognizes this one drawing from a tarot card that Olive had from a medium shortly after 828 disappeared, and she's kept it with her this whole time. Olive and TJ do some research on where this card came from, and it's from a tarot deck made by a man named Yusuf Alzuris, some scholar from the 16th century. He went out at sea with a crew of men one day and went through a lightning storm and disappeared for 10 years, only to return the same age as if no time had passed. Not only is this just like 828, but him and his men also started receiving callings, or as they called it, the voice of God. But they don't know when Alzuris died yet, so still waiting on the death date proof. But yeah, 500, 600 years prior, some guy went through the same exact thing. The 828 hate and worship leads to a fire at this nightclub that a lot of the passengers are at, and TJ ends up sacrificing himself to save Olive and Ben. Don't worry, he comes back in like an episode or 2. But as Ben was leaving the building, a glowing light led him to safety out of the carnage, almost like it was a calling. And later that night, Alzuris' journal, where he recorded all of his events, is delivered to Ben's office because before the fire, TJ luckily tracked it down and ordered it. And in this book is a drawing of Ben walking out of the fire with what looks like to be Olive in his arms, almost like Alzuris was looking at Ben through this light and drew a picture of it. Quick break from the Alzuris stuff, Sanvi is testing on herself now to catch up on the research, and her trying to eliminate the blood marker in her body is causing her to black out and almost die. And then Zeke is starting to get frostbite, almost like he's freezing to death. Yeah, I guess it's been a while since he came back, so his death date's coming up pretty soon. Episode 9 brings us our biggest development yet when Cal starts trying to build something he saw in a calling. As Olive and TJ are diving more into Alzuris' journal and Ben is trying to calm Cal down, the storm outside becomes more and more intense and tensions rise as it gets worse. Olive points out that it's clear and sunny outside, meaning they are inside of a calling right now. Grace starts getting seasick, the house looks like it's moving, and everyone is just freaking out. After seeing a drawing of Alzuris' ship in a lightning storm literally light up, Ben realizes Cal is trying to build his boat. This sends them into a calling on his ship during the lightning storm. When they look up, they see Flight 828 flying by. Alzuris didn't know what this was, obviously, so he called it the Silver Dragon, but this means that the ship and 828 were at the same place at the same time when they each disappeared during the storm. Whatever dimension or different universe they went to, time does not apply clearly. Because again, these are 600 years apart. So everyone is now fully convinced of this whole Alzuris thing and start to read more of his journal, which pretty much becomes the blueprint they follow for the rest of the show. But he says you have to follow the callings and all of their paths will lead to tragedy. Ben interprets this as Sanvi trying to get rid of her callings, and we see the next picture in the journal of all the men sinking out of the ship. One of them looks exactly like Sanvi. Real quick, gotta shout out today's sponsor. Well, kinda. So one of my good friends just dropped a clothing line called Manic, and if and when I do merch, this will be who I collaborate with, especially because of his skeleton design that is my personal favorite. But I also thought this would be a good way to show you guys what the merch that I make may or may not look like. The link to his website will be in the description below. I'd really appreciate if you guys could also check out his Instagram, which is also linked in the description. And yeah, I really like the clothes. This brand in general got me into trucker hats, and I can speak from in person, there is a lot more great stuff to come. Back to the video. Skipping through some stuff real quick, after a close call, Grace finally has her baby, Eden. Zeke is getting a lot worse and his death date is creeping up, so he proposes to Mick. I don't even know if I said that. In the other videos you would know, but him and Mick, love interest, yeah. They want to get married before he dies. While preparing for the wedding, Mick encounters our next villain of the show, meth dealer Jace. After a routine cop call where she raids his lab, she gets a calling of let him go, but because she wants to be a good cop, she can't. She should have listened though, because this guy starts his reign of vengeance by kidnapping Cal, something that Cal actually saw through a calling but didn't know what would happen. The final episode brings us the hunt for Cal and Sanvi confronting the Major. Jace brings Cal all the way out to the woods near a frozen lake where Mick, Zeke, and Ben are there to try and stop him. Lightning strikes the ice and everyone ends up falling in. Zeke, on the brink of death, jumps in to save Cal, completely freezing himself, while Jace and his crew sink to the bottom. While Ben, Mick, and Cal start to mourn his death, Zeke begins to glow and comes back to life, showing that you can beat the death date, possibly in the form of sacrificing yourself. Over to Sanvi as she is face to face with the Major and pulls off some James Bond shit with like some peanut dust or something that the Major's allergic to. And as she starts to go into anaphylactic shock, Sanvi says that she will give her the antidote if the Major tells her what she found in her experiments so she can save Zeke and the passengers. And all we get from her is the Major saying that they were trying to replicate the callings and weaponize them, and so far they haven't found a cure. The fight for the antidote leads to it falling and spilling on the ground, meaning Sanvi just murdered the Major. Just straight up murder. And the season ends with a huge ball drop. The tail fin of Flight 828 is found at the bottom of the ocean in Cuba? We start season 3 with Ben and Vance sneaking around the ports of Cuba because Cal had a calling of the tailfin and drew the boat that found it. After Ben strikes a deal with the two fishermen of that boat, he sees for himself a piece of 828, the tailfin, when we know 828 exploded very early season 1. He goes to touch it and has a very intense calling of him, Mick, and Cal and some random girl being affected by what seems to be a bright light and loud sound. I'm not really sure what it is. Cal got a good look at the other person in the calling and identifies her as Angelina Meyer. After some digging, we see she is in Costa Rica where Mick and Zeke happen to be on their honeymoon. No breaks with the callings here. They go to her parents' house and something is off from the get-go. So Mick sneaks away and a calling leads her to a cellar door in the basement where Angelina's crazy parents had her locked away. Apparently they are super religious and thought their daughter was possessed by the devil whenever she had her callings, and she did come back to life. But over in Cuba, the police get involved and Ben and Vance have to make a run for it with the tailfin, which ultimately leads to Vance and the tailfin being captured. Ben takes a plane over to Costa Rica and the crew goes back home, not entirely empty-handed because they did at least save Angelina. Cal actually knew that Angelina was coming through a calling and told Grace that they need to make a room for a guest that's coming to stay with them, making them trust Angelina because Cal usually does know more than everybody else. Ben and Mick are still trying to comprehend the tailfin, and Ben says that his callings of the plane exploding must be telling him that they did die that night and were resurrected. From here on out, the show just takes the religious route. But if their lives were already busy enough with all this shit, Jace and his crew resurface to the top of the water once the lake thaws, and yep, they are brought back to life too. The first half of the season is Grace, Eden, and Cal hiding out at Grace's brother's cabin while Mick tracks down Jace to try and stop him, or at least hold him off until his death date, which is only 48 days from now. And then Jared starts dating the Major's daughter as she's poking around trying to find where her mother is. It makes everything extremely difficult. And then Ben recruits Vance's old partner into helping him get Vance out of Cuba, and we see at the end of episode 2, Ben's hand and the handprint he left on the tail fin glowing with the same glow that we keep seeing. Cal sees the peacock again, Ben meets up with Egan, a passenger with photographic memory and just a terrible attitude. Alright, we are back to the good stuff. So TJ actually went to Egypt to do more research on everything. I always thought maybe the actor had like a disagreement on payment and got booted, but he sends an ancient piece of paper called a papyrus, and Olive was already going to go ham on this thing, but once she sees a peacock feather on it, she knows it's connected somehow. They find that the image depicted on this papyrus is of an ancient story that a lady would judge people when they died to see if they could go to heaven or not. She would weigh an ostrich feather and their heart on a scale, and if the heart was lighter, they would make it into heaven. Bringing up the very likely possibility that after they were potentially brought back to life, the passengers are being judged to see if they're worthy of making it to heaven. Vance finally makes it back and is shown to the government's new full-time 828 project, the Eureka Lab, where they have the burned remains of the original plane that came back, the tail fin, and a team of dedicated scientists doing nothing but researching 828. Something they should have been doing from literally episode 2. The tail fin had actually been recovered before it went to Cuba, but video surveillance show it glowing and disappearing right before it was found underwater. But while they did have it in possession, they tested it and found that it had evidence of being underwater for 7 years, 5 since they disappeared and 2 since they came back. And the night it disappeared from the lab was the same night that Zeke came back and Sanvi killed the Major. If this wasn't already a mind-bending season, Ben finds one of the passengers' bodies who died after they came back tucked away in the lab, but her autopsy doesn't show the death as being a result of the gunshot that would have killed her that we saw, but signs of a mid-air explosion. Her body also shows signs of having similar algae that grew onto the tail fin while it was underwater, which further points to them dying on the plane in 2013. So the Jace chase does take up a lot of time, but it is worth it in the end, trust me. So since they came back from the dead, they are of course also having callings. One of his callings he drew out, and it has symbols that were found throughout the papyrus along with 3 shadow figures. The off-brand TJ guy named Levi that's working with Olive on this paper recognizes these symbols from the depiction of the Last Trial, a biblical story where 3 prisoners were given a second chance. The whole story lines up perfectly with Jace and his crew, so they realize the 3 of them are being judged to see if they are worthy. But Jace is still choosing vengeance over forgiveness. Olive realizes that the paper is actually telling them they are all being judged together, not separately. So when Jace chooses vengeance, by the time the clock's up, all 3 have failed the test and the life is sucked out of them by this black smoke monster. Kinda looks like that thing from Lost. But this brings up the question, if the passengers are being judged like this too, are they all being judged together or separately? This brings us the lifeboat theory. So Zeke died and came back alone, so he was the only one in his lifeboat and stopped it from sinking. Jace sunk their lifeboat, killing his crew, and now it can be assumed that 828 has a lifeboat too, and if everyone isn't on the same page following the callings, it will in turn sink their lifeboat. Alright, finally, some Sanvi news. So she ended up getting a job at Eureka, half doing their test and the other half staying true to the passengers. But she found that on Ben's hand, the tail fin, and the dead bodies, there are traces of sapphire. Somehow, someway, Gupta orders a fossilized piece of driftwood from the Vatican Church because she believes it's the key to why miracles happen because, you guessed it, the same type of sapphire was found inside of this wood. It's 6,000 years old and was brought to the surface by seismic activity, and while they're testing it at the lab, they find the DNA of a peacock inside of it. So it turns out that a dormant volcano unearthed this piece of wood and an earthquake brought up the tail fin. Both not recorded on any charts, but people still said they felt them. Remember, seismic activity. But the dormant volcano is at a special location, Mount Ararat, I'm probably not saying that right, which is historically known for one thing. It's believed to be the resting place of Noah's Ark. Yep, this wood is a piece of that ark. This show is going full religious route now. Over the next month, they continue to test this piece of wood under the same conditions of Flight 828. Condensed dark lightning. As they are testing on it, Sanvi starts literally bleeding from her eyes, a very cool visual, and at the same time Ben is getting a calling of a flood, so maybe there's a leak in the lifeboat. Through some more callings and Olive's research, they find that Sanvi is lying about something, and the only way for her to survive what's happening to her is to confess. Probably killing the Major, maybe? Ben does some more research, and apparently Noah's Ark was said to be lit by sapphire. Sapphire's origin word literally means the glow of God. And he remembers in Alzurus' journal he also said that a glowing light was on his ship. Turn to the next page and what seemed like just a picture of drowning men, actually has a picture of Sanvi in the mix. Ben interprets all of this as the people who go against the callings and in turn sink the lifeboat have to jump ship to save the rest. And when Sanvi got rid of her callings through her test, she poked a hole in the lifeboat, but ain't no way they get rid of her, she just needs to confess. Alright, yep, she's good. But after she comes to, they show her that the last time they tested on the driftwood, it disappeared and reappeared instantly, but caused earthquake tremors all around New York. They still go ahead and test it again, and this time it causes an even stronger earthquake, but the epicenter is directly in the middle of where Zeke, Jace, and Griffin all had their experiences. And this seismic activity was so powerful that it opened up a hole in the ground that has magma rising to the top. I don't know what's crazier, Noah's Ark being involved or a literal volcano in New York. Sanvi interprets this as Mount Ararat wanting the piece of wood returned, so she goes to the opening, throws it in, and it hardens and closes up. So it looks like for now, she was right. The whole time Angelina is becoming more and more visibly crazy and attached to this family, saying Eden is her guardian angel, and after some weird ritualistic shit, Grace kicks her out, but Cal still feels his connection with her. But she's clearly manipulating him and he keeps letting Angelina in the house. When they tested on the wood, it caused the tailfin to disappear again, but once the volcano closed up, it returned to the lab. And of course they go back to testing it, which Sanvi thinks will cause much worse than just that volcano. The rest of the season is filled out with all of the passengers being arrested, besides the main characters. Mick quits the force because of this, and a shared calling of Ben, Mick, and Cal being on fire starts to cause actual burns on a Cal's skin. So he goes to Eureka to see the tailfin because he thinks he knows what to do to stop this. And you guessed it, his burns have sapphire on them as well. But the more they test on the tailfin, the worse he gets. Next we get our coolest calling yet, in my opinion, with Mick back on the plane as it starts to rain blood. Through a calling and finding a picture Cal drew, Ben knows that the only way to save Cal from these burns is to return the tailfin to the ocean, just like how Sanvi returned the driftwood. Cal, again, just knowing more than everybody else and not really saying much about it, says he knows what to do and proceeds to run into the box the tailfin is being tested on, touches it, begins to glow, and then disappears. Back home, Olive goes through Cal's drawings to see if one of them would explain why he disappeared, and they find a set of pages that make out a map of the sky, specifically the constellation Draco the Dragon. In perfect timing, right now, over that same location is a highly powered electrical storm, just like the one from 828 and the one that got Daily. They return the tailfin to the ocean and everything seems to be fixed until they're sent to another calling on the plane where Mick and surprisingly Cal are. Ben goes to talk to Cal and he says very creepily, "It's not over, this is the way it has to be." After this, Mick sees a trail of blood leading to Angelina's seat, and it turns out she was so convinced she needed to be with Eden that she kills Grace and kidnaps the baby. We end this insane season with Cal returning as the correct age of 16 as he sees his mom once more before she dies. Then we cut over to Eureka as they're closing up shop and Captain Daly suddenly returns onto the burnt 828 until him and the plane glow and completely disappear again. We start out this last season with a man in China being tested on very similarly to how the Major ran her test. Got the bright glow and everything. But he escapes and we'll catch up with him in a minute. We got to see how Ben's doing after he had his entire life ripped from him, and yeah, he's not doing too well. Still on the hunt for Eden, but this man is looking rough. We get a lot of flashbacks at the start of this season, but we see as cops pulled up to the stone house and try and solve this now murder case, Cal, the correct age, was waiting outside. But he has to hide his identity because he will get tested on even worse than before if the government finds out he disappeared and came back the correct age. So he goes by Gabriel now and kinda just hides out at the house. A calling leads Mick to finding the man from China in a shipping container, and he has 828 carved into his arm. She brings him to Vance and Sanvi's new setup, they call it the Bird's Nest, which I really like that name. And it turns out he was a traitor of the government, and since China and everyone else had gotten wind of the 828 situation, they actually run the second most tests in the world on forcing callings on people. He just happened to be a free test subject for them, and whatever calling he was having involves Cal, and he needs to quote-unquote get the box to the boy. So Cal goes back to where they found the man, his name's Henry Kim by the way, and Cal gets his first calling since he came back. It's a beeping noise that leads him to finding the black box flight recorder from Flight 828. Yeah, how the So it must have disappeared with the plane with Daly at the end of Season 3. How it ended up in China though, absolutely no clue. But Sanvi hooks up the box to listen to what was recorded the night Flight 828 went missing. And over the recording is the sound of Daly returning to Eureka at the end of Season 3. Oh, and by the way, we are skipping over the whole hunt for Eden if you want to know about it. I got full episode recaps of Season 4 linked below. So at the end of Season 3, if you remember, all the passengers except the main characters, of course, were arrested. Well, law enforcement has not let up on them yet. They are free, but they have to report to the 828 registry weekly, discussing if they've had callings or not. Overall, it's just a way for the government to keep an eye on them. Back at the bird's nest, as Henry starts giving more info, and he reveals as a child he was struck by lightning, and it left him this gnarly scar that his dad said was in the shape of a dragon and gave him the strength of a dragon. Whatever that means, he says he would use this strength to lower his heartbeat and hear ultra low frequencies and vibrations, and when he did this with the box, he would hear a sea of voices, quote unquote. Oh, so this dude got callings from lightning too. Okay, that does make more sense, but remember the term ultra-low frequencies for later. But Sanvi starts testing the black box to hear what Henry heard, and the seismic activity reader starts going off, so they stop while they're ahead. Henry has been being tracked by the government and they are about to close in on him, and since he feels like he's completed his mission, he turns himself in. But right before using his powers to have another calling, he brings him and Cal to the plane where he reaches his hands out toward him, and before we get any answers, Cal looks out the window, sees like an apocalyptic scene with a volcano, and then they jump right back. All this really showed is that danger is coming, but more specifically, Henry and Cal, they got some connection going. The Australian scientist from Season 3 comes back to help Sanvi figure out why there's seismic activity connected with the black box. And he concludes that every time she plays the recording, it emits ultra-low frequencies, which are electromagnetic waves that can't be heard by humans, which are usually only caused by seismic activity. They finally find a way for Cal to go see Henry to ask him about the calling, and Henry says that everything led up to him giving Cal the black box, and now his mission is complete. And instead of explaining, he says Cal has the power of a dragon too, but his scar is on the inside, and he will find out soon what that means. I guess thanks for your services, Henry, but would have saved us some time if you just explained. We end episode 2 with Cal's arm forming the dragon scar and Sanvi hearing the sea of voices on the black box. She isolates the audio and we hear every single calling recorded into this black box. Next episode, Cal goes to Sanvi so she can take samples of his scar, and when she shows him the recordings of the callings, it causes his scar to move around. Very gross looking. She explains that all the callings are hidden under the ultra-low frequency during the 6 seconds of the flight, most likely what was happening when they went through the storm. Also, quick note, just like with Cal's volcano calling, all the callings in general are becoming more foreboding and apocalyptic. Danger is clearly on its way. But Mick brings in the co-pilot to listen to the black box recordings because he's the only one left who really saw what happened. He says that lightning was hitting them from all angles and combined into one ball of light that they flew right into. Cal also saw this ball of light earlier from the side of the plane, which means this ball of light was chasing them, which is very eerie. But the co-pilot says when they hit the light, him and Daly felt an overwhelming sense of peace, everything just made sense, and it was just beautiful. Daly wanted to feel it again, hence why he flew back into the storm. But they refer to this light as the long delirious burning blue, and this triggers Cal's memory. When he touched the tail fin, he says he went back inside that ball of light. This brought him to the plane where he saw Daly and Fiona, and Cal wants to leave to save his mom, but Daly's saying, "Don't leave, you will forget everything you saw up here." But Fiona told him that he already had the answer and there's more to do. So when Cal went back, Daly tried to grab him, which is why he returned for that split second. But yeah, we are finally getting somewhere. Episode 4 brings us the best gift yet with a scene of Cal and Olive laying out pretty much everything to see what answers Cal allegedly already has. The Peacock Star card leads them back to the compass from Season 2 that had a bullet lodged in it. But when Cal presses the bullet like it's a button, it opens up. And inside is a plate with Divinia Conscientia, definitely saying that wrong, but it translates to Divine Consciousness, aka God. And the tarot card means to be enlightened, and when you are enlightened, you are connected to the Divine Consciousness. Since Cal was enlightened because he literally went into the light, he is connected. As his third eye is opening, all the objects light up and Cal makes the big connection. The glow, the light, the one that hit the plane and was seen by Alzurus, it is a location. While 828 was gone for 5.5 years, they were inside of the glow, and the glow itself is whatever divine consciousness is. Remember, sapphire means the glow of God? Well, this would mean every time a glow is present, that is God performing miracles. Every time these miracles happens, it's connected with the glow. Sanvi found that some animals, specifically the peacock, would communicate with one another using ultra-low frequency, or ULF. And she thinks the passengers can do this too, or that something is using ULF to communicate with the passengers, i.e. the callings. They refer to this frequency as the God frequency. The callings are the divine trying to communicate with the passengers. They bring Cal back in to test him and they put him through an MRI while he has a calling. The scanner starts to glow as his memory center is activated and they realize the black box wasn't even plugged in, meaning Cal can tap into the God frequency by himself, which would explain a lot about his character. Oh yeah, Ben finally gets eaten, but Angelina's still alive. Cal actually helped with this because he quote unquote knew what would happen like he had seen it before, Again, his memory center was activated. But we end the episode with a very important question. How could Cal remember something that hasn't happened yet? And Olive rightfully predicts he is remembering what he saw in the glow. Don't worry, I'll explain. Oh yeah, and Cal is sick again with cancer. Just another thing that's just fantastic right now. They really can never catch a break. So when you experience the glow or go inside of it, you become enlightened or all-knowing, meaning you see past, present, and most importantly, future. So callings are memories the passengers are having from when they were inside the glow, hence why they hear their own voice, unless it's like a shared calling or someone else's. And because they interacted with the glow, they can connect to the God frequency, which through ULF, is sending them the callings. Alright, let's wrap up the rest of part 1 of season 4. Cal has another end of the world like vision, and he thinks all the callings they have followed and solved is not enough for them to survive the death date. Yeah, I'd trust his opinion on this one. And while Olive is doing more research on sapphires, she finds a story of a woman named the Oracle of Delphi who would have calling-like visions and use sapphire to make them more clear. But while Olive continues to do her research, she finds that sapphire has been present for any miracle that's happened in history or connections with the divine. For example, Moses stood on sapphire when God gave him the 10 Commandments. Traces of sapphire is like fingerprints of a divine miracle. And Sanvi thinks sapphire can give the passengers the ability to generate unlimited callings, hopefully having one that saves them. Skipping over some more stuff, there's an 828 serial killer for some reason. They don't kill anyone important, don't worry, but it's Angelina's parents, and they actually might be crazier than their daughter, honestly. Either way, they are stopped, and more importantly, Cal is getting more sick. Eden draws out a calling that leads to Ben finding the 13 missing passengers that were being tested on by the Major back in season 1. Most importantly, Marco, the Bulgarian man Cal connected with. But it's very important that he comes back when he does, because remember, what these passengers showed us was the collective consciousness all 828ers have. And we even get a calling of the 13 passengers' paperwork glowing. Sanvi interprets this as the passengers having a direct channel to divine consciousness, as if the Major's experiments of trying to replicate their callings permanently tune them into the God frequency, like they are stuck in a constant calling. Sanvi gets a hold of the Major's research, and it too shows the memory center being activated whenever the passengers have a calling, just like Cal. And the Major was aware of the sapphire connection and would use it to generate callings for the passengers. The more sapphire, the more powerful the calling. Speaking of the sapphire, Olive finds that the specific type that was used by people like the Oracle of Delphi and Moses was called the Omega Sapphire, which is much stronger than the original gemstone. There were allegedly only 7 Omega Sapphires, and 6 of them were lost to history. The last one was supposed to be at Mount Ararat. Yeah, the Omega Sapphire was in the wood that was a part of Noah's Ark. No wonder why Noah's Ark story happened though. But that would mean that there are none left. Wait a minute.
I know that ain't who I think it is.
Yep, TJ is back and was already on the same page looking for the Omega Sapphire, and he thinks that it's right here in New York. What a legendary way to come back. I mean, I've always liked TJ. In New York, there's a Masonic temple where a group called the Omega Order would work out of. There's more connections to it, but pretty much some Freemasons had the Omega Sapphire, and their sole purpose was to protect this sapphire. Mick, Sanvi, and Egan end up in the boiler room of the temple, the same one that they've used many times before, and on the wall are bricks with Alzuris tarot deck cards carved into them. The Freemasons were onto him too. If you haven't seen episode 9 of season 4, them finding the Omega Sapphire is a fantastic scene, but the gist is they line up all the cards with their respective Roman numeral but are missing one, the World card, which has a volcano on it. And at the same time, Marco is having a calling and draws the exact same image of the World card, except there's an extra spot of fire at the bottom. Mick sees a fireplace at the bottom of this wall and rightfully assumes they need to light it up. This causes the wall to fall apart, and behind it is the drawing of the same lady that's on the papyrus. And yep, the last remaining Omega Sapphire is inside her chest, but Egan of course steals this. We end this episode with a shared calling of the plane being engulfed by lava with non-passengers on the plane, which confirms that the death date is not just for 828, but for everyone. This really is the end of the world. But at least they have the Omega Oh, Angelina steals it. Perfect. Last episode of the first half of season 4, and Angelina is literally breaking open the ground below her with the power of the sapphire. She then, using the Omega Sapphire, generates callings for Ben so she can steal Eden back. And what better way to do it but than to make him think he's talking to Grace as she tells him to bring Eden to her. It doesn't work though, and we see the power Angelina has as she screams and every single passenger around the world hears it. Mick and Ben finally confront Angelina at the same church she was at in season 3, and she has gone fully overboard, thinking she is bringing on the Day of Judgment as like God's messenger on some rapture type beat. Over to TJ and Olive on the papyrus, and the Lady of Judgment has a hole in her chest to represent the sapphire. They do a blue light scan and see that there are blue dots all around her, most likely these 7 Omega Sapphires. When Olive connects them all, they form the constellation Draco the Dragon. Remember? I'm telling you, man, it's all connected. So they think that if Cal can get his hands on the Omega Sapphire, it can tip the scales of judgment and save them. But Cal is currently on his deathbed and his scarf starts moving and lights up blue as he comes to the realization that he is the dragon and has the power of the Omega Sapphire within him. Henry did say he would figure it out. But this sends him to a calling on a plane. Using his new power, he can force callings, so he brings Angelina on the plane with him. When he grabs the sapphire in the calling, it explodes in real time in Angelina's hand. It seems like Cal's about to die either way though, and this is where we get the real heartbreak. And I'm sure for all of you that have seen it, you don't want to relive it, but Zeke absorbs all of Cal's sickness. He had this new power all season, but it's not really that relevant, and he dies sacrificing himself to save Cal's life. Zeke just loves self-sacrifice, man. While still in the church looking pretty defeated, Angelina finds one last piece of the Omega Sapphire, but it falls into the pit of lava she created. She goes in and grabs it, props to her for having the balls, and the gemstone is completely infused with her hand, as she remains as powerful if not more than before. We end part 1 of season 4 with the end of the world as we see gigantic tears in the ground as Angelina spits some creepy ass biblical verse. So I wanted to do this video to bring everyone up to speed in a lot quicker fashion than my other videos, and as much as I love my Manifest recaps, season 1 through 3 I was still pretty new to this and those videos could just be done so much better. But as we are closing in on part 2 of season 4, the final installment of Manifest, this video should give you everything you need to be fully caught up on what's happening. Again, I wanted to condense this down to only the very most important stuff and also what plays a role into season 4. But if you think I missed anything or want a more in-depth explanation, I do have all of those videos on my channel linked at the end of this video and in the description. And yeah, next time we talk about Manifest will most likely be June 2nd, the end of it all, where I'll do episode by episode recaps just like we did with the first half. And afterwards there will still be more content because we'll have to discuss everything that happens and try to finally answer that question of what happened to Flight 828. But for now, we know about the glow, the Omega Sapphire, Angelina bringing on the apocalypse, and it looks like Cal is the only one who can save it all. I hope this video brought all of you up to speed. Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and yeah, I'm just really excited to see you guys soon.